When my husband passed away, I quietly retained the inheritance, the beach house, and savings of $18 million. That evening, my daughter in law threw my bags out onto the street and shouted, "From now on, this house belongs to me. Go to a nursing home." I simply smiled, determined to rewrite the rules and make her regret her cruelty. The funeral had taken place 3 weeks earlier, yet the house still seemed haunted by Harold's absence. Every corner held memories of our 45 years together. The staircase where we took anniversary photos, the study where he built his real estate empire, the kitchen where we shared morning coffee, watching the seasons change through the garden window. I moved through these rooms like a ghost myself, touching familiar objects, trying to accept that he was truly gone. The cancer had been quick but merciless. Still, it gave us some time for meaningful conversations during those final weeks, conversations that only Harold and I shared. "Eleanor," he said softly, grasping my hand with a surprising strength for someone so ill. "I had everything arranged: the house, the beach property, Martha's Vineyard, the investments. It's all in your name. It's been that way for years. The 18 million in the main account was there too." I remembered how he had squeezed my hand at that moment, his eyes suddenly filled with concern. "Don't tell Andrew or Samantha right away. Let everyone have time to process the grief first. Our son is a good man, but he's fragile." "And Samantha," he paused, both of us understanding what remained unsaid. My daughter in law had always been polite around Harold, but her ambitions hovered just beneath the surface of each conversation. I kept my promise to Harold. After the funeral, I didn't mention the will or who truly owned our family mansion, where we all lived: Andrew and Samantha with the twins in the East Wing, Harold and I in the main suite. We have always been generous to them, letting them live rent-free in our home and providing them with a comfortable lifestyle that Andrew's moderate position at his father's company could not have supported on its own. Samantha had never worked a day since marrying my son. Instead, she focused on maintaining her social standing, hosting fancy parties, and constantly redecorating rooms in our house without ever asking me. Harold used to smooth over these minor disturbances with his diplomatic charm, but Harold is no longer here. The change in Samantha started gradually. A week after the funeral, she moved the furniture in the living room without asking. When I brought it up, she answered bluntly, "The room needed updating, Eleanor. We can't keep living in a time capsule." By the second week, she was telling the housekeeper to put her request ahead of mine. Mrs. Winters, the younger Mrs. Winters, would insist that this needed immediate attention, giving me meaningful looks as she spoke. Today marked 3 weeks since Harold's passing, and Samantha's behavior had become more demanding, even issuing commands. From the dining room, she called out without looking up from her magazine, "The good china needs to be set out. The ladies from the club are coming for lunch tomorrow." I offered a gentle suggestion: "The everyday china might be better for a casual lunch." She looked up, her face showing signs of irritation. I clarified: "The good china, the loge set with the gold trim." I paused, choosing my words carefully. That particular set had been a wedding gift from Harold's parents and was reserved for our most special family occasions. I was about to explain further when Samantha, now standing, interrupted. "For some mythical special occasion," she said sharply. I looked at her and responded calmly, "Harold is gone, Eleanor. Things change, and it's time you understood that." The harshness in her voice took my breath away, but I kept calm and steady. "The loge remains in the cabinet, Samantha. Feel free to use any of the other sets." A dangerous flicker appeared in her eyes. "You no longer get to decide things like that." I turned to leave, not wanting to argue further, when I heard her mutter, "It won't be long before we have you in a home anyway." That night after dinner, I quietly slipped into Harold's study, now my own. I made a call to Diane, my oldest friend. With her help, I ordered small cameras with audio recording ability to be installed secretly in the common areas of the mansion the next day, while Samantha was at her tennis lesson. Over the following days, the cameras caught precisely what I suspected. Samantha was systematically undermining my authority in my own home, making unkind remarks about me to the household staff, and most painfully, restricting my visits with Oliver and Lily, my cherished grandchildren. "Grandma isn't feeling well," so she would tell them when they asked to spend time with me. "She's very sad about Grandpa and needs some rest. You shouldn't trouble her." The twins, only 9 years old and confused by the loss of their grandfather, would nod solemnly and step back, unable to find the comfort we might have offered each other. I watched and listened through the discreet cameras as Samantha shared with her friends over cocktails. Once the house is officially ours, it will require a complete renovation. Eleanor's taste is quite outdated. I'm considering transforming her bedroom suite into a proper spa area. I remained quiet, gathering evidence, recalling Harold's advice during one of our final conversations. When you hold all the cards, there's no need to reveal your hand too soon. The breaking point came exactly 4 weeks after Harold's death. I had refused Samantha's request to use the antique Chinese porcelain set, a family heirloom passed down through 5 generations, for a casual lunch at the tennis club. Her reaction was explosive. "Who do you think you are to tell me no in this house?" she shouted, her well-maintained social facade collapsing entirely. "This mansion now belongs to Andrew. You're just a guest here, a guest who has overstayed her welcome." When I gently explained the importance of the porcelain and suggested a graceful alternative, Samantha completely lost her composure. "I'm tired of your presence, tired of your family's valuables and memories. This is my home now, and you're no longer welcome." She grabbed my arm, pulling me toward my bedroom, and started packing my clothes into suitcases. "From this moment, this house is mine. Go to a nursing home, go to a hotel, I don't care. But you have to leave today." Andrew came home during the confrontation, his face pale with shock. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. "Your mother is leaving?" Samantha said, her voice now sweet, but her eyes remained cold and firm. We discussed it, and she agreed that it was for the best. Andrew looked at me with confusion and guilt plainly written on his face. I could have argued with her then, or revealed everything I knew, but something held me back. Instead, I simply offered a small, knowing smile that momentarily unsettled Samantha. "I understand," I whispered. "I'll go stay with Diane tonight." As Andrew helped carry my quickly packed bags to the car, avoiding my gaze, I felt not defeat, but a strange, calm certainty. Tomorrow, I would contact Lawrence Bennett, Harold's longtime lawyer and our friend. Tomorrow, the secrets I had been keeping would finally come to light, and Samantha would understand the true meaning of consequences. The guest room at Diane's house was smaller than my suite at the mansion, but it gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: peace. There were no critical eyes watching my every move, no hushed conversations stopping whenever I entered a room. There were no constant reminders that I was suddenly considered unimportant in the life I had helped create. "I still can't believe she threw you out of your own house," Diane said softly, placing a cup of tea on the nightstand. My oldest friend since college listened to the entire story with growing anger. And Andrew just stood there. "Your own son." Harold always said Andrew inherited his height, but not his backbone. I felt that familiar surge of disappointment again. He's never stood up to Samantha, not once in 10 years of marriage. Diane sat at the edge of the bed. "So what happens now, Eleanor? You can't just let them take the mansion? That house has been in your family for generations." "No," I agreed. "I can't and I won't." I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Despite the late hour, Lawrence Bennett picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor," his voice was gentle with concern, "I've been expecting your call. How are you managing?" "It's time, Lawrence," I said simply. "Can you set up a meeting at your office tomorrow with Andrew and Samantha?" "Of course." "What should I tell them it's about?" "Just say it's regarding Harold's estate." "They'll come." I knew Samantha wouldn't miss what she thought would be the official transfer of assets to Andrew and the paperwork we had discussed. Lawrence asked carefully, "Bring everything, and I'll bring the recordings." After hanging up, I felt more at peace than I had since Harold's diagnosis. There was a sense of clarity in finally taking steps to honor not only the legal arrangements Harold made, but also the understanding between us that I would protect what we had built together. Not just the possessions, but the values they stood for. The next morning, I dressed with special care. A tailored navy suit that Harold had always admired, simple pearl earrings, and the diamond wedding band that had been on my finger for 45 years. A kind of armor for the coming fight. Lawrence's office was on the top floor of a downtown building, offering broad views of the city where Harold had built his real estate business. When Diane dropped me off, I noticed Andrew's car already parked in the lot. Samantha would have arrived early to stake their claim, mistakenly believing this was their territory. The receptionist guided me straight into Lawrence's large corner office. Andrew got up awkwardly as I entered, while Samantha sat quietly, her posture showing impatience. She wore a black designer dress that probably cost more than most people earn in a month, complemented by the diamond necklace Harold gave me for our 30th anniversary, a gift I had foolishly let her borrow for a charity event and never taken back. "Mother," Andrew said stiffly, "you look well." "Thank you, Andrew," I responded calmly, choosing to sit across from them rather than beside. It was a deliberate move that Lawrence noticed as he sat behind his large mahogany desk, with several folders neatly arranged in front of him. "Shall we begin?" Samantha cut in without any preamble. "We have a lunch reservation at the club at 1." Her tone implied that this meeting was just a formality, a small obstacle before she could fully take what she believed was rightfully hers. Lawrence adjusted his glasses. "Of course, Mrs. Winters, I called you here to discuss the handling of Harold's estate, as outlined in his last will and testament, which was updated and signed 6 months ago when his diagnosis was confirmed." "We are familiar with the usual procedures," Samantha said, clearly showing her impatience. As Harold's only son and heir, Andrew naturally inherits the family's assets with suitable provisions for Eleanor's care. Of course, she reached out to gently pat my hand, offering a false look of concern. "We want to assure you that you will be comfortable, Eleanor. We have already looked into several excellent retirement communities." Lawrence's face stayed calm as he opened the first folder. "Actually, that's not quite correct. Harold's will is very clear. Eleanor is the only person who will inherit all the assets. This includes the family mansion, the Martha's Vineyard beach house, all investment accounts adding up to about $18 million, and the controlling interest in Winter's real estate holdings." The silence that followed was complete. Andrew's mouth moved without making any sound. Samantha froze, her carefully maintained expression of calm patience collapsing into confusion, then into disbelief. "That's impossible," she finally said. "The house has been in the Winter family for many generations. It is meant to stay within the family. That's how these things work." The mansion was actually purchased by Harold and Eleanor together during the first year of their marriage, Lawrence clarified. "It has always been in both of their names with right of survivorship. Now it belongs only to Eleanor." Andrew finally found his voice, but as Dad always said, "Your father maintained majority ownership of the company. Lawrence added that you held 20%. That majority stake now passes to your mother." Samantha's shock quickly turned into anger, her knuckles turning white as she clutched her designer handbag. "This is absurd. Harold wouldn't leave his son with nothing. There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," I said for the first time. "Harold and I discussed all of this thoroughly in his final weeks. He wanted me to have the security and authority to manage the family assets as I saw fit." "You manipulated him when he was dying," Samantha accused, her voice rising. "He wasn't in his right mind." Lawrence cleared his throat. "I can personally confirm that Harold was completely clear-headed and firm in his decisions. He even left a video recording explaining his reasons if you'd like to see it." Before Samantha could say anything, I reached into my purse and took out a small USB drive. "But first, I want to share something else." I handed the drive to Lawrence, who connected it to his computer and turned the screen so we could all watch. The monitor displayed our family living room as seen from a hidden camera. Samantha appeared, talking to one of her friends. "Once the elderly woman leaves, I am going to destroy this mausoleum." Her recorded voice clearly said, "Andrew will get everything, and I will finally be able to make this house the way it should be." Next, there was another clip, Samantha telling the housekeeper to ignore my requests. Then another showing Samantha telling the twins they couldn't see me because I was grief-stricken and unstable. And finally, the confrontation from the previous night. Her screams that the house was hers, her physical pushing me toward the door, and throwing my belongings into suitcases. As the recording ended, Samantha's face had changed into a mask of rage and shame. "You were spying on me in my own home." "My home," I corrected quietly. "The place where you were living thanks to my generosity, a kindness you repaid with cruelty and disrespect." I turned to Lawrence, drawing strength from his calm presence. I have made some decisions. Please tell Andrew and Samantha that they have 3 weeks to leave the mansion. I have arranged for them to move into a 3-bedroom apartment in Riverdale. It's not as grand as what they're used to, but it is comfortable. You can't do this, Samantha whispered, shock replacing her anger. The mansion means everything to me. It's my dream home. Dreams need gratitude, Samantha. Not greed, I replied, surprised at the firmness in my voice. You will receive a monthly allowance that should be enough to live comfortably, though not luxuriously. About half of what you have been used to. Half. Her voice rose in shock. How are we supposed to manage on just half? I looked at her directly, the same way millions of adults do every day, by working. It's time you found a job and helped support your family. Andrew, who had been staring at the floor during the recordings, finally looked up. His face reflected a mix of feelings, shame, fear, and something deeper. Maybe the first hint of understanding what his silence had caused. Mom, please, he said softly, his voice shaky. The children love that house. They've grown up there. Oliver and Lily will always be welcome to visit me, I told him. I plan to spend quality time with them, but you and Samantha have 3 weeks to move. As I stood to leave, I felt no joy, no sense of revenge, only tired determination. This was about consequences, not punishment, about justice, not revenge. Harold had trusted me to protect what we had built, and I intended to honor that trust. I informed them that I would be staying at Diane's for now. I plan to spend some time at the beach house to clear my mind. Lawrence will take care of the details of your move and the new financial arrangements. Samantha remained frozen in her chair, still trying to absorb the reality of her situation. Andrew stood up awkwardly, looking suddenly older and diminished. I'm sorry, he said softly, his words sounding inadequate even to his own ears. I know you are, I replied. But sometimes, Andrew, sorry isn't enough. The 3 weeks after the meeting in Lawrence's office played out like scenes from a play I never expected to be part of. From my temporary refuge at Diane's house, I watched the drama unfold through updates from Lawrence, the household staff, and occasional glimpses when I visited to collect personal belongings. Samantha went through a series of emotional reactions, each more dramatic than the last. First, she refused to accept the truth, consulting 3 different lawyers, who all confirmed what Lawrence had told her. The will was clear. The mansion legally belonged to me, and the financial arrangements were entirely within my rights to control. Then came her attempts to negotiate. She left tearful voicemails, pleading to reconsider her hasty choice and promising to make amends. When those efforts didn't succeed, she fell into anger, mainly directed at Andrew, as if he could somehow reverse what had already happened. You should hear them argue. Maria, our housekeeper of 20 years, told Dion, when she brought some extra clothes I had requested, that Mrs. Samantha was throwing things. Last night, it was a crystal vase given to you by Mr. Harold for your 40th anniversary. I winced when I heard. The vase had been hand-blown in Venice during a second honeymoon, and now it was another casualty of Samantha's sense of entitlement. And Mr. Andrew? I asked, even though I could already imagine how my son would respond. Maria shook her head with a sad look. He simply accepts it. Sometimes he tries to soothe her, but mostly he locks himself in his office with a drink. I let out a sigh, recognizing the familiar pattern. Andrew has always chosen the easiest way, preferring to go along with Samantha's moods rather than face them directly. It was the same when the twins were young, and Samantha hired a night nurse, despite my gentle suggestion that the babies needed their mother. Andrew had simply shrugged and said, she needs her sleep. Mom, you know how she gets when she's tired. Always an excuse, always a surrender. 10 days after the meeting, I went to the mansion to pick up some family photo albums. I planned my visit carefully, knowing Samantha would be at her usual hair appointment, hoping to avoid any confrontation. Instead, I found Andrew alone in the kitchen, gazing into a cup of coffee, as if it might hold the answers to questions he had never thought to ask. He was startled when I entered and stood there awkwardly. Mom, I didn't realize you were coming by, he said softly. Just grabbing a few things, I explained, keeping my voice calm and steady. When I got closer, I could see how much the past days had worn on him. Dark circles under his eyes, new lines around his mouth, and a slight tremor in his hand as he placed his cup down. Samantha's meeting with a job counselor today, he suddenly shared. Someone Lawrence recommended. That's good, I replied, feeling genuinely surprised. I didn't expect her to start looking for work so soon. Andrew laughed quietly without humor. It wasn't exactly her choice. The reality hit when she couldn't pay for her spa membership renewal. He paused, then looked at me and asked, like, how are you doing? That simple question at Diane's, imbued with such kindness, caught me by surprise. The first time in many years he asked about my well-being without Samantha influencing the conversation. I'm all right, I responded honestly. It's peaceful there. No one questioning every decision I make or rearranging my things. A look of shame crossed his face. I let it happen, he said quietly. All of it. The way she treated you, how she gradually took control of everything. I simply said it was easier to go along with it. Yes, I agreed. Without softening the truth. It was easier for you, not for me. He nodded, accepting what I said. I keep thinking about Dad and what he would say if he could see how things have turned out. He wouldn't be surprised, I told him. Harold understood people well. That's why he arranged his will that way. He knew Samantha's personality, and he understood you wouldn't oppose her without outside help, making you do so. Andrew flinched at my honesty, but he didn't deny it. The moving company will be here next week. Samantha is very upset about the apartment. She says it's beneath us. She adds that she tried to explain to him that most people would find a 3-bedroom in Riverdale quite nice, but he didn't finish his thought, and she took it upon herself to complete it. However, Samantha isn't like most people. She values her worth based on square footage and zip codes, and she cares about the envy in her friends' eyes when they visit her dream home. She talks about the house all the time, Andrew continued, even before Dad became ill, about how she planned to renovate everything once it was finally theirs. I never corrected her assumption that I would inherit it. I asked if he knew the full truth, curious about how much Harold had shared with our son. Andrew shook his head. Not directly. But I think I had an idea. Dad always said the family's real wealth was in your hands. I thought he was speaking metaphorically about your emotional strength. Now I realize he meant it in a literal sense. Our talk was suddenly broken as the twins rushed into the kitchen, returning from their piano lessons with their nanny. Their faces brightened when they saw me, and they hurried over for hugs I had been missing for weeks. Grandma, you're back, Lily exclaimed, her small arms wrapping tightly around my waist. Just visiting, sweetheart, I replied, gently stroking her hair as I gathered some photo albums. Are you going to live with us again after we move? Oliver asked hopefully. Dad says we're moving to a new place next week. I looked at Andrew, who avoided my gaze and looked away. He hadn't told him I wouldn't be staying with them in the apartment. I'll be staying at the beach house for a little while, I explained softly. But you'll come visit me there. We can look for shells and build sandcastles. But Lily kept asking, her 9-year-old sense of fairness sensing that something was wrong. Why can't you live with us anymore? She pressed. Is it because Mom said those unkind things about you? Andrew's head suddenly lifted, and I saw the recognition dawn that the children had been more aware of Samantha's behavior than anyone had realized. Sometimes adults need a little space from each other, I said softly, but that doesn't change how much I love both of you. After I promised to call them that evening and made plans for a weekend visit to Martha's Vineyard, I gathered my photo albums and got ready to leave. Andrew walked me to the door, standing there awkwardly in the foyer of what had been my home for 40 years. Samantha is talking about divorce, he said suddenly, his voice quiet so the children wouldn't hear. Do you see what she signed up for? That she didn't marry me to live like an ordinary person or work like a servant? I looked at my son's face, noticing traces of Harold's features, but not his strength. Does that surprise you? I asked gently. Andrew sighed deeply, feeling even more deflated. No, and that's the saddest part. It doesn't surprise me at all. As I drove back to Diane's, I thought about how my son's marriage was falling apart. I had doubts about it from the start, yet I had accepted his choice. Now, facing the first real trouble in their marriage, it was breaking apart like a sandcastle at high tide. I felt no joy in being right, only a mother's sadness for the pain my son was going through and worry about how it would impact my grandchildren. Still, beneath that sadness, I held a quiet certainty that this difficult breaking apart might eventually lead to something healthier for Andrew, the twins, and maybe even for Samantha herself, if she could learn from what was happening. That evening, I called Lawrence to talk about the next steps I needed to take. It was time to regain control of my home and rebuild what Samantha had tried to tear down. Not just the physical space, but the feeling of safety it had always meant for our family. Martha's Vineyard welcomed me with open arms, just as it had every summer for 30 years. The beach house sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, its weathered cedar shingles and blue shutters unchanged since Harold and I bought it to mark his first major success in development. Unlike the mansion, which had been in Harold's family for generations before we made it our own, this place was always just ours, a sanctuary we built together. I arrived on a Thursday morning, exactly 4 weeks after Harold's funeral. I was very aware of the timing. In that short time, my life had been turned upside down, first by grief, then by betrayal. But when I unlocked the front door and took in the familiar scent of sea air and aged wood, I felt something change inside. It was not exile, it was a welcome homecoming. Mrs. Collins, the local woman who looked after the property all year, had gotten everything ready for my arrival. Fresh flowers were arranged in vases, and the refrigerator was filled with essentials. A handwritten note greeted me warmly, offering condolences for Harold's passing. These small acts of kindness moved me to tears more deeply than Samantha's cruel words ever had. I spent that first day rediscovering the house. I touched surfaces Harold had once held, opened the windows to let in the sea breeze, and enjoyed the empty rooms that had stood still since our last visit the summer before. In the master bedroom, I saw Harold's well-worn flannel robe hanging on the back of the door. I pressed my face into it, searching for his scent, but only caught a faint aroma of cedar and salt air. That evening, I sat on the deck with a glass of wine, watching the waves roll onto the shore below. For the first time since Harold passed away, I allowed myself to fully feel the depth of my loss. Not just the loss of my husband and best friend, but also the ending of the family life I believed we were creating. I had trusted that the relationships around me would help me get through my sorrow. I never thought it would unfold this way. Out loud, I spoke, imagining Harold beside me, as he had been many times before. I knew Samantha was tough, but I never imagined she would reveal her true self so completely. The wind carried my words away, yet I kept talking to myself, finding a small comfort in expressing thoughts I'd kept hidden for weeks. You were right about her and about Andrew. I should have paid closer attention. I took a sip of my wine, watching the moonlight flicker across the water. But you were also right about me. I am stronger than I appear. I slept peacefully that night, comforted by the sound of the waves and the relief of finally acknowledging the full extent of my grief. When I woke up the next morning, I felt lighter in spirit, more like myself than I had since Harold's diagnosis. The twins arrived that weekend, brought by Andrew, who seemed visibly uncomfortable and avoided meeting my gaze as he handed them over. Samantha chose not to come, saying she was too busy with job interviews to make the trip. The children, however, had no hesitation. They tumbled out of the car with excited shouts and ran directly into my arms. Grandma, your house is right on the ocean, Oliver said, eyes wide as he looked at the vast view. Can we go down to the beach right now? Lily asked, already starting to take off her shoes eagerly. I burst out laughing, my heart filling with joy at their enthusiasm. After lunch, my dears, let's start by getting you comfortably settled in. As I helped them unpack in the twin bedroom that used to belong to their father, I noticed how quiet and reserved they became when talking about home. Mom threw another plate yesterday, Lily quietly shared, arranging her stuffed animals on the bed. She said the apartment is too small for her good china anyway. She and Dad are arguing all the time now, Oliver added, his young face looking more serious than his years. She keeps saying it's not fair, and he should have protected her, whatever that means. I chose my words carefully, knowing how delicate the children's situation was. Sometimes grown-ups find it hard to adapt to changes. Your mom and dad are going through a tough time, but they both love you very much, I told them. Lily looked at me clearly, seeking reassurance. Mom says we wouldn't have to move if you weren't being so mean. she said, her eyes fixed on my face. She says you're punishing everyone because you're sad about Grandpa. Children's honesty never fails to surprise you. I sat on the edge of the bed and motioned for both of them to come closer. Your mother has the right to her opinions, I said softly. But what's happening now isn't about that. Grandpa and I worked very hard all our lives to create what we have: the mansion, this beach house, and the funds to care for our family. These things are now mine because that was what Grandpa wished. I'm not punishing anyone, but I do believe that actions have consequences, especially regarding how people treat each other. I thought about the times I was unkind to Oliver and then had to apologize and accept losing screen time, Lily said, relating it to her own experiences. Exactly like that, I agreed. But this is the adult version, with much bigger consequences. Mom was mean to you, Oliver said calmly. We heard her shouting at you that night. She told you to go to a nursing home. I hadn't realized they had seen Samantha's outburst. That was another missed sign of awareness in that household. Yes, she was upset, and that hurt my feelings a great deal. So, she's in timeout now, Lily suggested, explaining the situation in a way that made perfect sense from a child's point of view. I smiled to myself despite everything. Something like that. The weekend went by quickly, filled with walks on the beach, playing board games and reading bedtime stories. Simple grandmother activities that felt special after weeks of being told I was a burden to be thrown away. The twins thrived under the gentle attention I gave them, their lively spirits returning after being dampened by the tense atmosphere at home. When Andrew arrived to pick up the children on Sunday evening, I asked him to come in for coffee. He hesitated at the doorway, glancing around the beach house with an expression I couldn't quite understand. Finally, he said, I forgot how beautiful it is here, as he followed me into the kitchen. Dad and I used to fish off those rocks before sunrise. Remember? Of course I do, I replied, placing mugs on the table. You caught your first striped bass when you were 8. Harold was so proud he called everyone we knew. A faint smile appeared on Andrew's face. Those were good days. They truly were, I agreed, as I studied my son while I prepared the coffee. He seemed slightly better than the last time I saw him, less haunted, more aware. How is the move coming along? I asked. It's finished, he replied with a sigh. We're settled in the new apartment now. It's an adjustment. And Samantha? Andrew's expression became closed. She had her first day working as a receptionist at Blackwell Real Estate yesterday. Ironically, her father's biggest competitor. She came home upset, saying the office manager was harsh and that the work was beneath her. I nodded neutrally. The first day at any job can be tough, I said, but I couldn't help but think that a woman who had spent 10 years going to spas and charity luncheons might find the routine work a bit of a shock. He added softly that she's still mentioning divorce. His tone carefully measured. She said she did not sign up for this decline in her way of life, as she believes she deserves better. I placed his coffee in front of him, choosing my words carefully. What do you think you deserve, Andrew? The question seemed to catch him off guard. After a long pause, he admitted, I don't know anymore. I used to think I deserved everything Dad built: the mansion, the leadership of the company, the respect that comes with the Winter name. Now I'm not sure I earned any of it. That was the most self-aware thing I'd heard from my son in years. Instead of filling the silence that followed, I let him sit with the truth, watching as he gazed out at the ocean through the kitchen window. Finally, he changed the subject, saying, the twins seem happy here. They're more like themselves than they've been in weeks. Children are resilient when they have stability and love, I responded. They're welcome here anytime. I hope you know that includes you, Andrew. He looked at me then, his eyes shining with unspoken tears. Despite everything that had happened, despite allowing Samantha to treat you that way and standing by as she forced you out of your own home, I simply said, you are still my son. I am disappointed in your choices, but that does not erase a lifetime of love. As he left with the twins, making me promise to call them every evening, I watched from the porch until their car disappeared down the winding coastal road. The weekend had been a healing experience, unexpectedly so, not only for the children, but also for myself. In their straightforward affection, I found something I had been missing since Harold's passing: a sense of purpose. That night, I picked up the phone and called Lawrence with a decision. It was time to go back to the mansion. Not because Samantha's cruelty had been forgiven or forgotten, but because I refused to stay away from the home Harold and I had built together. Our legacy deserved better, and so did I. The mansion stood before me, majestic and familiar, yet somehow different now that I returned as the owner rather than the evicted matriarch. It had been exactly 6 weeks since Harold's funeral, 5 weeks since Samantha had thrown my belongings into the street, and 1 week since she and Andrew moved out to their more modest apartment in Riverdale. Lawrence had arranged for a thorough cleaning after they left. As I turned the key in the lock and stepped into the foyer, I still sensed a lingering tension in the air, as if the walls had absorbed the struggles of recent weeks. "Welcome home, Mrs. Winters," Maria greeted me, emerging from the kitchen with a tentative smile. She had stayed on, even when I offered her continued employment. One of the few staff members who had always shown me respect, even during Samantha's time in charge. "Everything's ready for you. Thank you, Maria," I said, placing my handbag down and taking another look at the space. The grand staircase still gracefully curved upward, and the antique Persian rug continued to cover the marble floor. The crystal chandelier still reflected the afternoon sunlight, but small differences revealed Samantha's brief time of influence. The family photos that once decorated the hallway were gone. The antique side table given by Harold's mother had been replaced with a sleeker, more modern piece. The warm cream-colored walls had been painted a sharp white, which now felt more clinical than inviting. Mrs. Samantha made some changes before she realized she would be leaving so soon. Maria hesitated politely, not quite finishing her thought, but I gently filled in the silence. "It's all right, Maria. The house has seen far worse than a few superficial updates." I moved through the rooms, observing the alterations and thinking about what could be brought back to life and what might be better to reimagine. In the living room, the family portraits had been removed from above the fireplace, replaced by an abstract painting in cool blues and grays. The dining room was mostly unchanged, though my grandmother's lace table runner was missing. The kitchen still worked but lacked warmth. The copper pots and family recipe books that once made it the heart of our home were gone. It wasn't until I reached the master bedroom that I saw how far Samantha's assumptions had gone. The room had been completely changed. My antique vanity was replaced with a modern dressing table, and the handcrafted quilt Harold's grandmother made for our wedding was nowhere in sight. The walls had been painted a dark charcoal color, making the once light and airy space feel smaller. Maria explained from the doorway, her tone showing disapproval even though she kept her composure. She said that she moved in here the day after you left, and that the master suite should belong to the new Mrs. Winters. I ran my hand over the unfamiliar bedspread, a smooth gray satin that felt cold to the touch. Most of my belongings had been stored in the East Wing, I explained. "Although some items have gone missing," I added. I nodded, feeling a sense of resignation, but still a touch of disappointment. "We'll get everything sorted out, Maria, one room at a time." Over the following days, I gradually reclaimed my home in a careful, deliberate way. I put family photographs back in their rightful places, retrieved cherished heirlooms from hastily packed boxes, and slowly removed the most obvious signs of Samantha's short stay. The master bedroom needed the most work, as I worked to turn it back into a space where I could sleep peacefully, without feeling like a visitor in my own home. During this process, I surprisingly found comfort in the physical effort of restoring my space. Every picture was rehung, each heirloom was recovered, and every room was repainted in the warm tones I preferred. All these acts were about healing, about finding my place in the world again after the two major shocks I had faced, Harold's passing and Samantha's betrayal. A week after I returned home, I invited Diane over for dinner to celebrate being back. We sat in the newly restored dining room, the table dressed with my grandmother's lace runner, which I had found tucked away in a linen closet, and the everyday china that Samantha had considered plain and unimportant. "It feels like you again in here," Diane said, glancing around with appreciation. For a while, it seemed like the house had lost its soul. I nodded in agreement, pouring another glass of wine for each of us, feeling as if she was steadily removing any sign of me, of us, to clear the way for her idea of what a winter's home should be. "Have you heard from them?" Diane asked, always straightforward. Andrew takes the twins to visit every weekend, I told her. They're settling into the apartment quite well, although they do miss the garden. Lily describes her new room as cozy, which is her way of saying it's small but okay. Samantha, I sighed, setting down my glass. She is still working as a receptionist, still furious about the change in her lifestyle, and still blaming everyone but herself for the situation. I paused, thinking about how much I should say. Andrew mentioned she's been pressuring him to challenge the will, look for some legal loophole. Her latest idea is that Harold wasn't mentally capable when he made the updates. Diane snorted awkwardly. Harold Winters was as sharp as a tack until the very end. Any lawyer with half a brain would laugh her out of the office. Lawrence assured me the same, I confirmed. Still, it causes more tension in their marriage and gives her another grievance to hold on to. We switched to lighter topics as we finished eating. But later that evening, after Diane had left, I found myself standing in Harold's study, the only room I had left mostly untouched since his death. His presence was strongest here, among his books and papers, in the leather chair that had become smooth through decades of use, beside the chess set where we had played countless games during winter evenings. I sat at his desk and opened the top drawer, knowing he kept his most personal belongings there. Among them was a sealed envelope with my name written in his distinctive handwriting. I found it soon after he passed away, but hadn't yet had the courage to open it until now. Inside was a single sheet of his personal stationery, filled with his bold handwriting. My dearest Ella Lunner, if you are reading this, I have left you to face this world alone, something I promised I would never do. For that, I am deeply sorry. I have arranged our affairs as well as I could, trusting everything to your capable hands. Some may question this choice, especially those who have underestimated you all these years. They see only the gracious hostess, the supportive wife, the loving grandmother. They do not see what I have always known, that beneath your gentle appearance, there lies a core of steel. Andrew will find this transition difficult. His weakness has always been his reluctance to stand firm when faced with challenges, especially from Samantha. I worry that her influence has lessened the man he might have become. Perhaps once he is free from my shadow and confronted with real consequences, he will finally realize his potential. One can only hope. As for Samantha, I have never trusted her motives or her integrity. She married our son for the prestige of the Winters name and all that it symbolizes, not out of love for the man himself. I suspect that when tested, her true nature will come to light. And when that moment arrives, you must be ready to protect yourself and our legacy. I entrust all this to you, not as a burden, but as a recognition of your strength. For 45 years, you have been my partner in everything. The foundation upon which all we have built rests. The world may see my name on buildings and business ventures, but you and I know the truth. Nothing would exist without you. All my love, now and always, Harold. I pressed the letter to my heart, tears flowing openly for the first time since the funeral. Harold had known, of course he had known, exactly how everything would turn out. He had seen through Samantha's false front of respect, predicted Andrew's failure to stand up for what was right, and prepared me as well as he could for the difficult days ahead after his passing. More importantly, he had truly seen me, not just as his wife, the mother of his child, or the grandmother of his grandchildren, but as a woman of strength and worth, capable of carrying forward everything we had built together. As I carefully refolded the letter and placed it back into the envelope, a feeling of peace settled deep within me. The house around me was still in the process of healing, showing the marks of Samantha's short time in charge and my ongoing efforts to restore it. However, it was once more truly mine, not just legally, but in my heart. I was determined to turn it back into a warm home for myself, the twins, and to honor Harold's memory. 2 months after reclaiming the mansion, I had found a new daily rhythm. The twins came to stay with me every weekend, filling the house with joy and laughter in rooms that had become too quiet. I began hosting a monthly bridge game, which gradually turned into a casual support circle for widows, helping us face the unexpected challenges of life after loss. Twice each week, I volunteered at the children's hospital where Harold used to give generously. There I read to children who were too unwell to leave their beds. Life had changed, but it also regained a sense of purpose and meaning. How could it be any other way? Yet it felt purposeful and meaningful again, grounded in the responsibilities Harold had left in my care and the relationships I was carefully building each day. One Tuesday morning, Lawrence called with news I had not expected. Eleanor, he began after our usual greetings. Andrew has requested a meeting. He specifically asked that I be there with the financial advisors. Is there a problem with the allowance arrangements? I asked, feeling an immediate concern. Despite myself, even though my lifestyle had been scaled down from before, the monthly amount I provided was still quite generous, more than enough for a comfortable life if spent wisely. He didn't specify, Lawrence responded. He only said it involved the family business and his future role. He sounded different, more attentive than I had heard him in years. My curiosity grew. I agreed to the meeting. 2 days later, I found myself in the conference room at Winters Real Estate Holdings, where Harold had conducted business for many years. Andrew was already there when I arrived, dressed in a sharply tailored suit instead of the more casual clothes he had often worn since his father's passing. The change was subtle but noticeable, like a boy who had finally chosen to dress as the man he was meant to be. Mother, he greeted me as I entered. Thank you for coming. Lawrence arrived shortly after, followed by Harold's longtime financial advisor and the company's CFO. Once everyone was seated, Andrew surprisingly took charge of the meeting with an authority I rarely saw from him. I've called you all here because I have a proposal about my future with Winters Real Estate, he began, his voice calm and steady. For 15 years, I have worked at this company without truly earning my role. Dad gave me a title and some responsibilities, but we all know I was never the executive he hoped I would become. This honest admission took everyone by surprise. Andrew had always defended his place in the company, insisting he was adding value even when the facts suggested otherwise. Recent events have led me to rethink many things, he continued. My role in the company, my responsibilities to my family, and most importantly, the kind of man I want to be. Here. He glanced at me briefly. I have spent 2 months examining every part of our current projects, talking with department leaders and reviewing financial forecasts. With the help of the CFO, I created a detailed plan for how I will stay involved with the company. He handed out folders filled with carefully prepared documents, financial forecasts, organizational charts, and a comprehensive business plan. As I looked through the contents, I was increasingly impressed to see that this was no hastily put together presentation. Andrew had clearly put a lot of time and careful thought into these proposals. In summary, he explained, I plan to step down from my role as executive vice president and instead take on the position of project development manager for our new riverfront project. It's a role I am genuinely qualified for, with clearly outlined responsibilities and measurable results. My pay would reflect this, with a salary appropriate to the position, plus a performance-based bonus that rewards real achievements, not just my last name. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. This would be a notable step back in both title and pay. Andrew. Yes. Andrew simply agreed, because it was the right thing to do. I haven't earned the executive position, and remaining in it doesn't benefit the company or my own growth. As the financial advisors asked him numerous questions, Andrew responded with surprising competence, showing a deep understanding of the business I had never seen before. He had clearly done his homework, prepared for every concern, and carefully considered the consequences of his proposal from different perspectives. When the conversation became technical, I found myself looking at my son in a new light. Physically, he looked like Harold. He was the same height, had a strong jawline, and moved his hands the same way when emphasizing a point. But what I had always felt was missing in Andrew suddenly appeared. Something important had changed. After almost an hour of detailed discussion, the financial team seemed cautiously in favor of Andrew's plan. Lawrence, always the practical one, turned to me. As the majority shareholder, the final decision is yours, Eleanor. What are your thoughts? All eyes focused on me. At that moment, I remembered Harold's letter, his hope that Andrew might finally realize his potential when faced with real consequences. Was this the start of that growth? I'd like to speak with Andrew privately before I make my decision, I said. The others left the room. leaving Andrew and me alone in the conference space that still carried the memory of Harold's presence through its rich mahogany furniture and the portrait on the far wall. "This is unexpected," I said once we were alone. "What made you reconsider so suddenly?" Andrew looked directly at me. It was a change from the man who usually avoided eye contact during the tough conversations. "Losing the mansion was the wake up call I needed," he admitted. "For the first time in my life, I faced real consequences for my choices, or rather, for the lack of choices and my reluctance to stand up for myself." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "When Samantha threw out your things and I did nothing, I betrayed not only you but myself. I became someone I couldn't respect. And now," I added softly, "I am trying to earn back that respect, starting with being honest about what I can do and what I cannot. I'm not the visionary businessman my father was, and pretending to be otherwise helps no one. However, I do have skills that could be useful in the right position." "What about Samantha?" I asked the question that had been left unspoken throughout the meeting. "How does she feel about this proposed change?" A shadow crossed Andrews's face. "She moved out last week, saying she didn't sign up for marriage to a mid-level manager. The divorce papers arrived yesterday." Although I expected this outcome, hearing it confirmed still brought a sting of sadness. Not for losing Samantha as a daughter-in-law, but for the pain Andrew and the twins would go through as their family changed. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "The children are confused but adjusting. They'll mostly stay with me, with Samantha visiting on weekends once she gets settled," as she put it, with his mouth tightening in response. "Apparently, she has a friend connected to real estate development in Chicago. She is moving there next month. She says there's nothing left for her here, now the winter's arrival no longer matches the lifestyle she had hoped for." I wasn't surprised by Samantha's priorities, but I was taken aback by Andrew's honest understanding of them. The son, who had always made excuses for his wife's actions, was finally seeing her clearly, without illusions. "And how are you really doing?" I asked, putting aside the business proposal to focus on the man before me, my only child, now going through his own difficult transition. Andrew took the question seriously and seemed unexpectedly relieved. "The apartment feels more like a real home now that there's less tension. The twins laugh more easily, and I've come to enjoy being actively involved in their care, without Samantha constantly controlling every detail." He offered a faint smile. "This morning, I made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Lily declared them the best breakfast ever, even though they were barely recognizable as reptiles." I found myself smiling in return, catching a glimpse of the Andrew I remembered from before his marriage. More light-hearted, more genuine. "As for your proposal," I said, shifting focus back to the matter at hand, "I am inclined to approve it with one small change. I would like quarterly reviews of your performance in this new role, carried out by an independent evaluator. If you meet or surpass expectations for 2 consecutive quarters, we will also discuss a plan for gradually increasing your responsibilities, earning advancement rather than feeling entitled to it." Andrew nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. "That sounds fair. In fact, more than fair." As we prepared to end our meeting, he hesitated for a moment before asking, "Would you consider having dinner with us this Friday at the apartment? The twins miss you, and I—" He paused, appearing unusually vulnerable. "I could really use some advice on being a single parent." "I'd be honored," I replied, touched by his request. "And Andrew, your father would be proud of what you're doing here today." For the first time since Harold's passing, I saw my son stand a little taller, his shoulders square, with a confidence that came not from entitlement, but from hard-earned self-awareness. "I hope so," he said quietly. "I'm finally trying to be the man he believed I could become." The twins' excitement was immediate and lively when I arrived at the apartment for dinner that Friday. Oliver took my hand to show me his new bedroom, while Lily danced around us, sharing details that her brother hadn't mentioned. "Dad let us choose the colors ourselves," Oliver explained proudly, pointing to the walls painted a bright blue. "And we got bunk beds, so there's more room to play." "I have the top bunk," Lily added with importance. "Dad says I'm more coordinated, so I'm less likely to fall." The apartment, though smaller than the mansion, was cheerful and welcoming, a corner unit on the eighth floor with large windows and an open floor plan. Andrew had thoughtfully arranged it with comfortable yet practical furniture, adding personal touches that made it feel like a warm home rather than a temporary place. Family photos were displayed prominently, and the twins' artwork was framed on the walls. The bookshelves were filled with well loved volumes from the mansion's library. In the small but efficient kitchen, Andrew was putting the finishing touches on dinner. It was nothing fancy, just a simple roast chicken with vegetable, but it was prepared with clear care. The twins helped peel the carrots, he explained, catching my approving glance. We're trying to help them develop their cooking skills beyond microwave popcorn. Mom never let us help in the kitchen, Lily said flatly. She always said we'd make a mess or get hurt. Well, a little mess is part of learning, I replied as I handed her plates to set the table. Your grandfather used to say that the best meals are often the ones where things don't go perfectly. Like when Dad burned the garlic bread last week, Oliver asked with a mischievous grin. Andrew chuckled, a relaxed sound I hadn't heard from him in years. Exactly like that. But we managed to save the spaghetti, didn't we? Dinner was lively, with the twins eagerly sharing stories from school, and Andrew taking part with genuine interest, not the distracted half attention I had noticed before. I saw small but meaningful changes in how he was parenting. He listened carefully when the children spoke, set gentle limits when their energy became too much, and referenced inside jokes that showed they shared special moments together. After the twins were asleep, Andrew and I relaxed in the living room with coffee. Through the large windows, the city stretched out before us, shimmering with lights that turned ordinary buildings into a scene full of possibility. I noted that they seemed to be adjusting well, better than I had expected, considering all the changes. Andrew nodded. Kids are resilient, as you said, and honestly, I believe they sensed more than Samantha and I realized. The tension, the arguments, they pick up on all of it, even when we thought we were hiding it, I agreed. Children always know, I added. They might not grasp the specifics, but they soak up the emotional climate like sponges. They do miss the mansion, Andrew admitted, the space, the garden, but they don't miss the feeling of walking on eggshells or constantly wondering what might set Samantha off. He turned his coffee cup slowly between his hands. I don't think I fully understood until we left how much energy we all used just to manage her moods. And how are you handling things practically? I asked. The daily routine of balancing work and raising children can be quite demanding. I hired a part time nanny, a graduate student who picks them up from school and stays until I arrive home from work. She is wonderful with the children. She is studying early childhood education. He smiled softly. Having fewer responsibilities at work actually makes things easier. Regular hours, less travel, and a more predictable schedule benefit all of us. We talked about the difficulties of being a single parent, and I shared stories of how I managed during Harold's frequent business trips when Andrew was young. The conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years, no longer hindered by Samantha's presence or unresolved tensions. As the evening came to an end, Andrew brought up a subject I had expected. I've been thinking about the holidays, he started carefully. Thanksgiving is next month, and then Christmas. The twins were feeling uncertain about how much things would change this year. Without Dad, without the mansion, and without what? He hesitated, then finished, without the family altogether. I understood the unspoken question. You're wondering if we might celebrate together at the mansion? Andrew nodded, looking relieved. If you're comfortable with it, not moving back, of course, he added quickly. Just visiting for the holidays. I thought about his request, balancing my own emotional limits with what the twins needed, and of course, considering Andrew's clear efforts to rebuild what his passivity had damaged. Since I had taken back my home, I had been careful about who I welcomed in, mindful of the sanctuary I had worked hard to restore. But family healing couldn't happen without careful reconnection. A Thanksgiving dinner at the mansion would be a lovely idea. I decided we could also invite Diane. She had been such a strong support throughout everything, and perhaps Christmas Eve as well, when the children stay overnight so they can wake up to presents under the tree in the morning. Andrew's face lit up with sincere gratitude that truly meant everything to them and to all of us. As he later walked me to the door, he paused, seeming to hesitate with something on his mind. Finally, he said, "I owe you an apology. A genuine one, not just the vague words of regret I've offered before." He looked directly into my eyes. What happened with Samantha, how she treated you, and how I stood by and allowed it, as it was unforgivable. He paused again, then continued. I have failed you as a son, failed the values you and Dad raised me with, and I am truly deeply sorry. His apology, so honest and complete, surprised me. For a moment, I saw in him the little boy who had once tearfully admitted to breaking a vase, refusing to let his nanny take the blame. A child with a natural sense of right and wrong that had somehow become buried under years of compromise and adaptation. Thank you, I said gently. That means a lot to me. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, he added. I understand the trust has to be rebuilt over time through consistent actions, not just words. But I want you to know I am committed to that process, no matter how long it takes. On my way home, I reflected on the evening, not only on Andrew's apology, but on the entire transformation in our family dynamic. The mansion, once a battleground where Samantha had claimed ownership and tried to exile me, would now serve as neutral ground for cautious rebuilding. The upcoming holidays, which I had feared would be painful memories of Harold's absence, might instead become moments to create new traditions, honoring his memory while accepting how our lives have changed. The most noticeable change was in Andrew himself. Without Samantha's influence, he seemed to be reconnecting with parts of himself that had been hidden during their marriage, his natural warmth, her subtle humor, and his ability to reflect. The weak-willed son, who had stood by as his wife evicted me from my own home, was gradually becoming a man who took responsibility for his choices and their outcomes. As I stepped into the mansion, my home now regained and renewed, I found myself again thinking of Harold's letter. Perhaps now that I was no longer overshadowed and faced real consequences, he might finally realize his potential, as he had written about our son. It seemed that quite possibly this growth was starting to take shape, not through gentle words or patience, but because of firm boundaries and clear consequences. Some lessons, it appeared, could only be learned the hard way. The thought offered no real comfort, only a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes love is best expressed not through endless efforts to please, but through the courage to say enough. The week before Thanksgiving brought this season's first significant snowfall, turning the mansion's grounds into a winter scene that brought back memories of past Christmases. As I watched over the staff preparing for Thursday's dinner, my mind drifted to Harold. I remembered how he always insisted on bringing in the first log for the fireplace himself. How he would secretly hide small gifts around the house for me to find during the holiday season. I thought of how he would read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" to Andrew and later to the twins, with such dramatic flair that the children loved him for it. This would be our first Thanksgiving without him. A heavy feeling settled in my chest as I went over the menu plans with Mrs. Chen, our longtime cook, knew exactly which dishes to recommend without me needing to ask. It was about honoring tradition while recognizing the changes that had taken place. Mr. Harold's favorite cornbread stuffing was, of course, on the list, she said, marking it with a gentle touch. But maybe we could try that cranberry compote with orange zest this year, something new to go alongside the familiar favorites. I nodded, appreciating her thoughtful intuition. That idea sounded perfect. On Thursday morning, I woke early, watching the sunrise cast a golden glow over the snow-covered yard. The house was peaceful but not empty, filled instead with memories and possibilities rather than quiet absences. I dressed carefully in a deep burgundy sweater Harold had given me last Christmas, pearl earrings that had been a gift for our anniversary, and comfortable slacks that suited the practical tasks of hosting. The twins arrived first, bursting through the door with the energy only children can have, despite the complicated family dynamics. "Grandma, the house looks like a snow castle," Lily exclaimed, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Can we build a snowman after dinner?" Oliver added, already taking off his coat and boots in the entryway. I don't see why not, I replied, welcoming their excited hugs. If it's not too dark, then maybe tomorrow morning instead. Andrew came in more quietly, carrying a bouquet of autumn flowers and a bottle of wine. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom, he said, kissing my cheek. The house looks wonderful. I had decorated simply but warmly, with arrangements of russet chrysanthemums and golden maple leaves, candles in Harold's favorite hurricane lamps, and the fine china, though not the disputed large set, laid out on a table prepared for five. Family photos, including several of Harold's, were displayed prominently, a deliberate choice to keep his presence felt even in his absence. Diane arrived last, carrying her famous apple pie and a sincere smile. Look at you, Eleanor Winters, hosting Thanksgiving like a woman half your age, she said warmly, hugging me tightly. Harold would be so proud. The meal was a careful blend of old traditions and new ways. We followed familiar customs, such as Harold's favorite stuffing, carving the turkey, and sharing gratitude before eating, creating a space for our changed reality. Where I see Andrew sat at the foot of the table where Harold would have been, not as a replacement, but as the family's senior male member. I stayed at my usual place at the head of the table, a spot I now held, not just physically, but also symbolically, as the family's heart and leader. The twins kept the conversation lively with stories about school and questions about past Thanksgiving celebrations. Their natural curiosity brought forth memories that made everyone smile rather than feel sad. Is it true that Dad once tried to deep fry a turkey and ended up setting the garage on fire? Oliver asked, his face full of the wonder and excitement children often show when hearing about their parents' minor accidents. Andrew let out a good-natured groan. I think that story is a bit exaggerated. It wasn't the entire garage, just a small fire that was quickly put out, I said, a smile forming as I remembered. Your father had to promise not to cook alone for a whole year after that. He even had to take proper cooking classes before he was allowed back in the kitchen. Dad is a pretty good cook now, Lily said with loyalty. His pancakes are way better than Mom's. She always burnt them. A brief, uncomfortable pause followed. When her mention of Samantha came up, her name was the first to be spoken, even indirectly. Throughout the day, Andrew kept clearing his throat. Your mom is good at other things, he said carefully, trying to be diplomatic. We all have unique strengths. She isn't very skilled at being kind to others, Oliver said frankly, with the honesty of childhood, especially not to Grandma. I looked at Andrew, noticing his discomfort, but also his reluctance to silence his son with empty words. This was something new. A year ago, Andrew would have immediately quieted such remarks, no matter how true they were. Adult relationships can be complicated, I said softly. Your mother and I had different views on certain matters, but that doesn't mean you should think badly of her. Diane, always practical, quietly changed the subject to dessert, and the moment moved on. However, later, after the twins had gone outside to play in the snow under Diane's watchful eye, Andrew brought up the topic again as we washed dishes together in the kitchen, a task he had offered to do without being asked. I'm sorry about Oliver's comment, he said, carefully drying a serving platter. I have tried to ensure they understand not to speak badly about Samantha, but I also don't want to teach them to deny what's real or pretend they didn't see what actually happened. It's a delicate balance, I realized. They are observant children. They saw how she treated me and how our relationship fell apart. Andrew was silent for a moment, carefully wiping another plate. Finally, I asked, have you heard from her at all? Not directly. Her lawyer communicates with mine about the divorce, he replied, setting down the dish towel and looking at me with surprising honesty. She's challenging the prenuptial agreement, claiming she was forced into signing it and that things have changed significantly since then. Do you think she'll succeed? I inquired, although I had a feeling I knew the answer. Andrew shook his head. Lawrence believes it's unlikely. The prenup was very strong. Dad made sure of that. She will receive the settlement outlined there, which is generous by any reasonable standard, but not enough to sustain the lifestyle she had become used to, nor that of the children. She is not disputing the custody arrangement we proposed. Primary physical custody with me, and the weekend visits for her once she is settled in Chicago. However, his face tightened. Last week, she called to say she might not take the children for Thanksgiving weekend after all, because she plans to attend a charity gala with her new connections there. This was the first holiday after their separation, and already she was putting social ambitions ahead of her children. The bitterness in his voice was clear. Yet beneath that, there was also a frank awareness of Samantha's true priorities, something that had been missing during their marriage. He was now seeing her without the filters of justification and compromise that had marked their relationship for so long. I kept making excuses for her, he continued softly to himself, telling myself she was just stressed, or that her difficult childhood made it hard for her to show affection consistently, or that her social ambitions were ultimately for the good of our family. He looked up and met my eyes, but the truth is simpler and more difficult to face. She married into the winter's name and everything it symbolized, not me. When that illusion shattered, so did any pretense of commitment. The painful realization hung between us as we finished the dishes in comfortable silence. Outside the kitchen window, we saw the twins and Diane building a crooked snowman. Their laughter sometimes floated back to us on the cold winter air. Finally, I heard Andrew say, as he dried his hands, "I've been thinking about what Dad used to say about wealth and its purpose. That money is like fertilizer," I remembered with a smile, "only useful when spread around to help things grow." Andrew nodded in agreement. "I would like to set up trust funds for the twins. Not the kind that create spoiled adults who never appreciate the value of working, but the kind that provide educational opportunities and a strong foundation in life." I thought that was a wonderful idea. I agreed, and Lawrence could help arrange it properly. "Would you consider becoming co-trustee?" he asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability that reminded me of the boy he once was, seeking approval for a school project or sports achievement. "I trust your judgment on these matters, especially when it comes to balancing generosity with responsibility." His request touched me deeply, not only because of the practical trust it involved, but also because of what it represented about our healing relationship. "I would be honored," I said simply, as we rejoined the others outside. Watching the twins add the finishing touches to their snowman, I felt Harold's absence deeply, but also sensed his lasting influence in the values Andrew was rediscovering, in the traditions we were choosing to adapt rather than abandon, and in the family bonds that had been stretched under pressure but ultimately remained strong. This Thanksgiving, though different from those before it, had given me something unexpected to be grateful for. It was the hope that even amid betrayal and loss, something genuine and resilient could still emerge. The mansion had been transformed for Christmas, just as it had been for the past 40 years under my care. It was tasteful yet warm, elegant without being showy. It was filled with traditions that had gained significance through years of repetition. Fresh pine garlands decorated the staircase banister, their fragrance blending with cinnamon and cloves wafting from the kitchen. The large tree in the main living room stood 12 feet tall and was decorated with ornaments that told the story of our family. The silver rattle, which had been Andrew's first Christmas gift, sat among hand-painted globes that Harold and I had collected during our travels, along with the increasingly intricate handmade decorations the twins contributed each year. Since Thanksgiving, a new routine had developed. The twins spent every weekend with me. Sometimes Andrew would join us, and other times he would take those precious 2 days for rest and personal time. I had also started attending Oliver's basketball games and Lily's dance recitals, stepping into roles that Samantha had once filled more for appearance than genuine interest. Andrew and I talked almost every day, covering everything from parenting plans and business topics to deeper reflections on the changes happening in our lives. Samantha did not visit with the children for Thanksgiving, explaining she had an important networking event in Chicago that she couldn't miss. The twins were a bit disappointed, but not heartbroken. This showed how much she had already become a distant presence in their emotional lives. She did, however, confirm she would take them for the weekend after Christmas, marking her first visit since their separation. The twins approached this idea with a mix of curiosity and nervousness, which I observed closely. I offered reassurance, careful not to undermine their relationship with their mother. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that covered the mansion's grounds like powdered sugar, providing a beautiful setting for the evening I had prepared. Andrew and the twins arrived early in the afternoon. carrying overnight bags and gifts wrapped in a charmingly imperfect way that showed Andrew's personal touch rather than the professional packaging. We baked cookies to leave for Santa, Lily announced proudly, carefully carrying a tin decorated with reindeer stickers. Dad helped, but we did most of it ourselves. They are a little crispy, Andrew confided softly as the twins hurried upstairs to the rooms I had prepared for them, brightened with new bedding and small touches that reflected their growing maturity. Baking still isn't my strongest skill. Santa's not fussy, I reassured him with a gentle smile. He appreciates the effort. The afternoon was filled with cheerful preparations, helping the twins hang their stockings on the mantel, playing Christmas carols on the old baby grand piano that hadn't been played in a long time, and putting together a gingerbread house with more enthusiasm than precision. Andrew seemed more at ease than I'd seen him in years, genuinely laughing at the twins' jokes and wholeheartedly taking part in activities he might once have watched from a distance. After an early supper, we prepared ourselves for what had once been a cherished family tradition during winter, delivering homemade cookies and small gifts to the staff at the mansion and to neighbors. Harold had always emphasized the importance of these personal touches, believing that wealth brought not just privileges, but also a duty to serve the community around us. Over time, Samantha had gradually moved away from this custom, favoring impersonal gift cards instead of the time consuming act of personally delivering the tokens. As we walked along the snowy path toward the groundskeeper's cottage, Andrew recalled, Dad always had us sing carols when we delivered the packages. The twins ran ahead, their excitement barely contained. Even when I was a sullen teenager who found it embarrassing, he added, he thought it was important to show up in person because you can't truly build community through intermediaries. I watched my breath swirl in the cold air and agreed quietly. He believed in the power of showing up oneself. Andrew nodded thoughtfully at the memory. I have been reflecting deeply on his philosophies lately. Many of the lessons he tried to share with me went unacknowledged at the time. The evening's deliveries brought genuine joy to those who received them, clearly surprised that the tradition continued after Harold's passing. The twins responded wonderfully, keeping their manners and even singing carols spontaneously at several stops. When we returned to the mansion, our cheeks were rosy from the cold and the exertion, and a pleasant tiredness settled over us all. As I watched over the twins' bedtime routine, making sure their teeth were brushed and their Christmas pajamas found, Andrew briefly stepped away and then returned with a small wrapped gift sitting on my bedside table. A little early Christmas gift, he said softly when I looked at him with a questioning expression. Something I'd like you to have tonight. After ensuring the children were comfortably settled with promises that Santa would indeed visit their temporary bedrooms, and after placing cookies and milk by the fireplace with careful ceremony, Andrew and I spent a peaceful hour arranging presents under the tree. At last, I retreated to my room and opened his mysterious gift. Inside the simple wrapping was a leather bound journal, its cover embossed with my initials. As I unfolded it, I saw the first few pages filled with Andrew's handwriting, neat, precise, almost like heralds in their clarity. Dear Mom, this journal is for your thoughts, memories, and wisdom, whatever you wish to record for the future. But I took the liberty to write on these opening pages, trying to put into words what I found difficult to say face to face. When Dad died, I lost not just my father, but also my moral compass. I had depended on him to be the strength of the family, to make tough decisions, and to stand firm when principles were at risk. His absence showed me how much I had placed my own moral growth in his hands. Then came Samantha's treatment of you and my unforgivable silence. By not protecting you, the person who had always protected me, I failed myself in the deepest way. The resulting hardships were painful, but ultimately necessary. Losing the mansion, facing financial difficulties, and seeing my marriage fall apart as its materialistic foundation was revealed. All of these were consequences of the choices I had made, or rather, the choices I had chosen not to make. These past months have been among the hardest of my life, but they have also been the most revealing. For the first time, I am intentionally making decision about the kind of man I want to be, the father I hope to become, and the son I failed in the past but now aspire to be. You could have completely cut me out after everything that happened. It would have been understandable if you had chosen to limit your relationship to the twins and kept me at a distance. Instead, you have offered a path to redemption, not through hollow forgiveness, but through the more challenging and meaningful chance to earn your trust again by consistent actions. This Christmas, I am thankful for consequences, the opportunity to rebuild something genuine from the ruins of what was lost, for your strength in holding me accountable while still remaining open to the possibility of change, with love and the utmost respect. I closed the journal, tears blurring my sight as I traced my fingers over the engraved initials. This gift, not just a physical object, but the vulnerability and self awareness it represented, was perhaps the most significant gift I had received in years. Not because it erased the pain of what had happened, but because it recognized that pain while also showing a way to move forward. When I finally drifted to sleep that night, I had a dream about Harold. Not the Harold in his final days, weakened by illness, but Harold in his best years, strong, lively, with eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. The same smile that had first won my heart many years ago. You did everything just right, a Eleanor Dream Harold told me, his voice so full of familiarity that even in sleep my heart ached with longing, my feelings of loss mixed with compassion, my sense of boundaries with love. I simply said to him, I miss you. He answered, I know. But he added, you're carrying on everything that truly matters, everything we built together. On Christmas morning, I woke to the sounds of excited whispers and muffled giggles just outside my bedroom door. The twins, no doubt, eager to see what Santa had left for them. For a moment, I remained still, holding onto the comforting memory of the dream, like a precious gift kept close. Then I got up to face the day, ready to make new memories while cherishing the old ones, to continue building the legacy Harold and I had begun together. It was a legacy not of grand mansions or vast fortunes, but of values that had withstood the test of loss and betrayal. It was built on boundaries that defined not only what we would accept from others, but also what we expected from ourselves. It was about a family reconstructed through hard earned wisdom rather than simple obligation. As I opened my bedroom door to the twins' happy cheers, I caught Andrew's eye over their heads. Something passed between us, a shared understanding, a recognition of how far we had come and how much more we might yet achieve. It wasn't a perfect healing, but it was real. It wasn't the family we had been, but perhaps, in time, it could become a family stronger for having been broken and carefully mended. Spring arrived at the mansion grounds in a burst of vibrant colors. Daffodils and tulips broke through the still cold soil that lingered from winter. Cherry trees blossomed with pale pink flowers that floated like snow across the lawn. 6 months had passed since Harold's passing, 6 months of deep change and gentle healing. I sat on the terrace with my morning coffee, watching a pair of cardinals dart between the newly leafed branches. Harold had always loved this season, the promise of renewal after dormancy, a hopeful reminder that endings are often the beginning of something new. The sound of tires on gravel drew my attention, and I looked up to see a sleek black car I did not recognize approaching the mansion. It was too early for visitors, and I wasn't expecting any deliveries. Curious and a little cautious, I set down my coffee and moved toward the front of the house. The car stopped at the main entrance, and a figure stepped out that I hadn't seen in nearly 4 months. Samantha. She appeared different, thinner, with a sharper hairstyle. Her blonde hair cut into an angular bob that highlighted the sculpted contours of her face. Designer sunglasses concealed her eyes, but the firm set of her mouth was visible as she looked up at the mansion's front. I stepped onto the porch, making my presence known before she could reach the door. Samantha, I greeted her politely, keeping my tone neutral. This is unexpected. She started slightly, then steadied herself. Eleanor, you look well. An awkward silence grew between us. The last time she had been on these steps, she had been throwing my belongings out and claiming the mansion as her own. Now she stood as a visitor, waiting for permission to enter what she once sought to take. Finally, I said, would you like to come in? My words a courteous gesture that overshadowed our past. I was just enjoying coffee on the terrace. She nodded stiffly, following me through the house, with the impression of someone trying not to seem overly curious about her surroundings. I noticed her quick glances at the changes I had made since I took back control of my home. The walls had been painted in warmer shades, the furniture rearranged to make conversations easier, and Harold's photographs placed prominently throughout. On the terrace, I poured a second cup of coffee without asking if she wanted one. She accepted it quietly with a soft thank you, then sat on the edge of a chair as if she might get up and leave at any moment. I broke the silence by saying, "I assume you're in town to see the children. Andrew mentioned you'd be visiting this weekend." She nodded. "Yes, that's right, but I'm not here for that." She hesitated, showing an unusual uncertainty. "I wanted to speak with you directly." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to go on. "My attorney told me yesterday that the divorce will be finalized next week," she said, removing her sunglasses to show eyes rimmed with faint fatigue. "The prenuptial agreement remains in effect. I will receive exactly what was laid out there, no more, no less." "I understand," I replied, still unsure why she chose to tell me this. "And you're okay with the arrangement?" A flicker of the old Samantha appeared, a bitter twist of her mouth, a sharp glint in her eye. "Satisfied? Not really. But I've been advised that fighting further in court would be both costly and time-consuming." She took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "I've secured a new position with Blackstone Development in Chicago as a junior marketing director. The salary is enough, less than my previous monthly allowance, but sufficient to keep a decent apartment and a modest lifestyle." It seemed to cost her something to say all this acknowledgement of diminished circumstances, of having to work for what had once been freely given. I became curious about her transformation, about what had motivated her to seek me out after months of silence. "Congratulations on the position," I said sincerely. "Holt always said you had a natural talent for marketing. It's good to see you applying that skill professionally." Samantha looked momentarily surprised by my honest remark. "Thank you," she responded before setting down her cup decisively. "But pleasantries are not the reason I'm here. I've come to make you an offer." "An offer?" I asked, feeling intrigued despite myself. "Yes, about the mansion." Understanding slowly dawned 6 months later, and she was still fixated on the house she had long desired so openly. The house she had tried to acquire through manipulation and intimidation. "The mansion isn't for sale, Samantha," I said firmly. "I'm not proposing to buy it," she clarified quickly. "I know that's not possible. What I am suggesting is a particular arrangement." She leaned forward, her slender frame radiating focus. "My new role involves certain social responsibilities, hosting clients and organizing events that highlight my appreciation for luxury and good taste. The apartment I rented in Chicago is adequate, but not particularly impressive." I began to understand her direction, yet I decided to let her proceed. "I am proposing that you permit me to use the mansion for occasional gatherings, perhaps 4 times a year. I would handle all expenses, including catering, staff, and any special arrangements. Your presence wouldn't be necessary, though you would be welcome if you chose to attend." She now spoke quickly, as if concerned I might interrupt her. "It would be strictly a business deal, professional and beneficial for my career, and possibly a step toward mending some of the strain between our families." I studied her face carefully, looking for any signs of manipulation, as I had learned to recognize through our years together as a family. What I saw instead took me by surprise. It was clear there was fierce ambition, but also a sense of desperation, the look of someone who had lost more than they had expected and was trying to rebuild from unfamiliar ground. I spoke carefully. "That's an interesting proposal." I was curious. "Why come to me with this? Why not approach Andrew? After all, he's still legally your husband for a few more days." Samantha's gaze flickered downward briefly. "Andrew wouldn't agree. He's changed, become more resolute in some ways, more like Harold than I expected." I couldn't help but smile slightly at her remark. "And you believed I would be more flexible after what we went through?" She nodded. "No, I thought you might be more pragmatic. This arrangement could work in everyone's favor. I need to maintain certain appearances for my career. You would receive compensation for minimal inconvenience. The children would see that their parents can get along peacefully despite the divorce." I thought about her offer carefully, considering it like any complicated business deal, because that's exactly what it was. It wasn't a plea from the heart or an effort to make peace, but a proposal for a deal from a woman who always saw relationships as something that could benefit her. The mansion is not a setting, Samantha, I said at last, not a scene to impress others or boost careers. It's a home, my home, the place where Harold and I lived for 45 years, where we raised our son, where we built a family filled with memories. Her face tightened slightly. So that's a no. That's a no, I confirmed, but without anger. Still, I'd like to offer something else if you're interested. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. What advice, I asked simply, from someone who built a life and identity far from wealth and social standing? Harold and I began with very little, the fortune, the mansion, the social rank. These qualities developed over many years through hard work and careful decision making. Samantha appeared doubtful, but did not immediately dismiss what I said. You have real talent, Samantha. Skills beyond your ability to navigate social situations. Intelligence, ambition, and an instinct for positioning people and things to your advantage. These traits can create something enduring, something that truly belongs to you rather than relying on others. Why are you giving me advice? She asked, her voice filled with genuine confusion. After everything that had occurred, I took her question seriously. Because despite our past, you are still the mother of my grandchildren. Because clinging to resentment benefits no one. And because I believe people can change, especially when they have the right motivation, as you seem to now. She remained silent for a long moment, turning her empty coffee cup between her carefully manicured fingers. I don't know how to build something from nothing, she finally admitted. A rare moment of honesty. I have always aligned myself with what was already established. Perhaps that is your first lesson, I suggested softly, learning to value the foundation before dreaming of the mansion built upon it. As she prepared to leave, Samantha paused at the steps leading to the terrace. When I first met Andrew, I believed the most valuable thing about being a Winters was the name and everything that came with it. Now I question whether I truly understood what the Winters legacy is. And what do you think it is now? I asked, genuinely interested in her views. Consequences, she replied after a pause. Not just facing them, but accepting them as the natural result of the choices made. I hadn't understood that before. I watched her walk back toward her car. This woman who once threw my belongings into the street and demanded I leave my own home. She moved differently now, with less of an entitled swagger and more of a determined purpose. Whether that change would prove lasting or merely temporary remained uncertain. But the fact that change had happened at all opened up possibilities I had not previously considered. That evening, as I sat in Harold's study, reviewing quarterly reports from Winter's real estate, I found myself smiling at the irony of Samantha's comment. She had planned to evict me from my home and take ownership of a legacy she had not earned. Instead, she had unintentionally set in motion a series of events that strengthened that legacy in ways neither of us could have expected. Andrew was becoming the man Harold had always believed he could become. He was still imperfect and human, but he was increasingly guided by his principles rather than taking the easiest path. The twins were doing well under a parenting approach that focused on their emotional well-being more than appearances, and I had discovered strengths within myself that I had not known I possessed. The ability to set boundaries without being harsh, to deliver consequences with kindness, and to mend what has been broken on an even stronger foundation than before. When my husband passed away, I quietly kept the inheritance, the beach house, and the $18 million in savings. I whispered to myself, recalling those tough days immediately after Harold's death. That evening, my daughter-in-law tossed my bags into the street and shouted, "From now on, this house is mine. Go to a nursing home." I looked around the study, which now truly reflected both Harold's presence and my growing sense of identity as the guardian of our shared legacy. I simply smiled, prepared to change the rules and make her face the consequences for her cruelty. The result of that was not what I had initially expected in that moment of shock and betrayal. It wasn't revenge or humiliation, but the more valuable currency of self-awareness and personal growth for Samantha, for Andrew, for the twins, and indeed for myself as well. Harold would have appreciated the symmetry, I thought, in how an attempted theft had ultimately resulted in a deeper understanding of what is truly valuable. It showed how proper consequences can lead not to mere punishment, but to real opportunities for genuine change. As I closed the ledger and got ready for bed, I felt his presence not as a ghost or memory, but as a continuation of what we shared. The values we built together now lived on in new ways and through new generations. The true inheritance was passed not through legal papers, but through lived example. The choices we made, the consequences we accepted, and the love that remained strong even when tested by betrayal.